Welcome to The Happy Brain, the podcast that answers your questions about the happy brain chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. Hi, I'm Loretta Bruning, founder of the Inner Mammal Institute and author of Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. I hope you enjoy our show today, and if it raises any questions in your mind, feel free to send them to me, either through the contact form at the Inner Mammal Institute, which is innermammalinstitute.org, or contact me on Facebook, and you're invited to enjoy our Facebook discussion group with the Inner Mammal Institute, or my daily Facebook message on Loretta Bruning PhD page. Now, enjoy the show. Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm here today with Anthony Poponi, who's a speaker at Focus on the 40, which helps people focus on the 40% of our happiness that we're alleged to have control over. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, how are you, doctor?
Hi, good, thanks. So I enjoyed your email. He sent an email with a subject line that said, "Now I'm even more socially awkward than ever." And it was a funny cartoon with people looking for different ways to greet each other without shaking hands. So that was funny. So tell us what you mean by social awkwardness.
Well, I think the subject line was important, is that I'm even more socially awkward. It's not to say I wasn't socially awkward before the pandemic, as many people would attest to. But I think it's just changed that there's this new dynamic of uncertainty about, before we kind of during the pandemic had sort of a clear set of guidelines in most of our communities of like, don't do this. This is okay. Don't do this. If you're going to be 6 feet, wear masks, distancing and all those things that made it clear. And now we're sort of, and that was awkward in its own right, the willingness or the need to give up like hugging someone or handshakes or whatever it would be. And especially, I lived in Hawaii for a while where I was like retrained that hugging is a great thing. And I love it. Of course, oxytocin is a lovely response we get there neurochemically. But, with sort of the change in my local community of some people are fully vaccinated and have gotten a month out from their second vaccine. Some people choosing not to get vaccinated. We have a pretty high rate where I live of people that are getting vaccinated. And, having this weird exchange of like meeting my neighbor for the first time. And he's a, older gentleman, and he wasn't wearing a mask. I was getting ready to get in my car. I wasn't wearing a mask. And he just walked up to me and stuck his hand out. And normally I would say in, 2019, I would have been, "Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm your neighbor. Let's talk about you and me. And like, let's connect for a brief moment, have some chit chat, And this one was more of like, this running inner dialogue in my head of, his hand is out. Should I shake his hand? I don't know. Is he vaccinated? Well, I'm fully vaccinated. But is he had both of his vaccinations? Oh, he's in the elderly population. This is high risk for him. I probably shouldn't shake his hand. Should we do a fist bump? Should we do an elbow? Like all these sort of things. And then, you just try to get out of your own head. And then I feel like I said to him, like in this one mashed together phrase that turned into one word of like, "Hello, my name is Anthony. It's really nice to meet you." Like this super awkward, just like blurting it out sort of thing. And I don't know. I just think that's that sort of, we're walking up to restaurants being like, "Am I supposed to wear a mask? Am I allowed to wear a mask? Do I need to wear a mask? You're wearing a mask. You're not wearing a mask. Nobody in here is wearing a mask. What's going on? I don't even know." So I think it's just like navigating this sort of transition back to whatever we're calling normal again. And I don't know. I guess I'll never be normal.
So you're saying that it's nice to have clear expectations. And when there's not clear expectations, that you anticipate criticism. And you have good reason to anticipate criticism because people are damn critical. And during the pandemic, I think people became more critical. And I think there's a whole subculture of filling all of your free time with efforts to criticize and condemn others. And that's especially propounded in the news. And the more time people have spent listening to the news, the more they look for ways to criticize others. However, you're saying that this man stuck out his hand. So why would you think that you were violating him in some way if he was already taking the initiative?
oh, that's just me getting in my own way. And I'd say if I have an advanced degree in being socially awkward, I probably have a emeritus of getting in my own head sometimes and overthinking things. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think you spoke to it in a really interesting way that of how maybe how you'd frame that response of like being ostracized for a behavior. Like he reached his hand out, that was an opening, that was a welcoming. Receive that and proceed.
Yes.
Versus me walking up and being like, "Think, here's my hand," and then being ostracized for that or being
Yes.
critiqued. You
Yes.
know,
So the reason is because our nonverbal brain is wired by past experience and by emotions. That's what builds the pathways. So there was a lot of emotion a year ago around, oh, if you shake hands, you'll die. So anything that triggers strong emotions builds a big pathway. And then the next time you are in the situation where you would non-verbally just respond to an open hand, then the biggest pathway you have is, oh no, not only are you going to die, but you're going to kill grandpa, and that makes you a bad person. So all of these pathways, I think it's so valuable to understand this, because first, to know that we're creating it ourselves and that it's just a pathway, but these pathways can get created so easily because in this climate of condemning other people, every mammal has a fear of being socially ostracized. And once that is a real fear, you build a fear pathway, and then it seems like everything is a landmine and there's nothing you can do without being socially ostracized.
yeah, yeah. I think you put all that into really great context. So, the trick for us now, and kind of what I spoke to in that same email of like, it's time to sort of unwind everything that we've wound up over the last 18 months or so. And it's not going to be easy, right? I think I don't know how you frame it, but when I speak about neural pathways, as I speak about like the superhighways, the easy things that we do that are our default behaviors, our lazy behaviors, our natural, our way of doing things, and we've built up new neural pathways in this time. And now we have to like make the awkward, clunky moments to work our way through building those neural pathways. I use the metaphor of superhighways and alleys. Like an alley is weird, it's a little uncomfortable, it's hard to get around, it's not as easy to navigate, it's not as smooth. But that's how you rebuild that new pathway of being like, now we can get back to kind of doing handshakes again without it being a giant internal monologue.
Good, good. Although it can still be a giant internal monologue about some other issue,
Sure.
because there is always that sense of if you violate a norm, something terrible will happen. And
Yep.
societies have always had this. In fact, I was fascinated to learn that in Tahiti and in the Tahitian language, the word is taboo, which is where we get the word from. And if you do something taboo, it's just instant execution. They just kill you. And there was
Really?
like a really long list of taboos. Yeah.
So I thank you for sharing that. And now I'm going to be extra, extra awkward thinking about taboo and being executed for a handshake. So now I'm worried.
Good, good. Well, you mentioned that you will never be normal. And so it's interesting to talk about what normal is. So I don't really think there is such a thing as normal, because every brain is built from life experience. So there's no like, this is the standard brain, and then something is wrong with this person. But that's the impression we get from the medical model, the disease model. And the reason we have that is simply to get free care, to get a diagnosis so you could get free care. There's never been any discovery like that this is normal. So every brain is built from past experience. So every brain is going to be different. But then what we all have in common is we all fear social ostracism, because our brain is built in childhood when social ostracism is a real death threat. But your way of fearing social ostracism is different from mine, because mine is built from my experience and yours is built from yours.
Yeah, the absolute beauty of the human brain is the dynamic way in that has been shaped to this point and how it can be reshaped.
Mm.
That also just creates this very wide spectrum of possibilities of how people arrive at where they are right now. And it's super hard to like really get inside the head of the other person when you're trying to communicate with them. It takes a long time. And I just did some work yesterday with a group meeting in person for the first time again, and doing a team building exercise, and and getting them to just be, they're in this giant room and they're all sitting far apart from each other for that reason, and it's still just being cautious about that, but then trying to like rebuild like these ways to dive deeper with people and getting a team to work deeper when we still have this layer of, and we still have to stay away from each other, and we should, like we have to be thoughtful about not touching and COVID, all this sort of stuff. So it's like
Let me
an
give
extra
you
barrier.
Let me give you a hypothetical situation. Let's say you have a team and the new policy is that we no longer need to socially distance. And let's say that there's only, well, I don't know where we're in California, that's the new rule. And let's say that everyone in the group, either they're vaccinated, or they just don't personally fear the thing, which is me. Well, I'm also vaccinated, but I didn't fear it before. But let's just say that you have one person in the group who says, I want to distance and I want you to distance. So the culture where any one person can say, I don't like this, I'm uncomfortable, and the whole group must adapt to me and do what makes me comfortable. Otherwise, I'm going to condemn you and try to undermine and ruin your career. So I'm curious, like, since you lead workshops, like, how would you deal with that?
I would just say, jokingly, the first thing I would say is, well, are they the person signing my paycheck? Because that's maybe different, because I don't want to be ostracized from a paycheck, if that's really a thing.
Yes,
I think, and it also really depends on, their position in the company. You can have a lot of what I would call outlier sort of belief systems in a workplace, and I think you want to make all these workplaces sort of like accommodating to everything. But at some point, if a workplace isn't a fit for any characteristic or any reason that's really important to you, and it's not going to work for you, then maybe it's not the place for you to work anymore. That could be a lack of alignment with your own values, ethics, even what you want to accomplish.
But what I'm saying is the other extreme. Let's say the workplace has the culture where every single thing must be accommodated. So nothing can ever get done because one person raises their hand and says, I don't like chocolate. Another person raised their hand and said, I don't like vanilla. Another one doesn't like strawberry. So we can't have any. This actually happened to me once. I went to this.
So no cake.
I went to this group dinner. It was Chinese meal, and we were going to all order together. One person was allergic to this. One person was allergic to that. And so instead of saying, well, we'll get one dish that you can eat, no, it was, we can't order any dishes that person that cannot be eaten by everybody. So it was just celery and eggs. We got a bunch of different dishes, and they were all like totally bland, like just plain celery, mushrooms, just plain omelet. I mean, it was disgusting. So this is what happens when you give people veto power. And I think it's in my work, I'm always explaining how people want to be special. So if I have the power to veto everything on the menu that you want to eat, and then somebody else is like, well, they got away with it, I'm going to use my veto power too. So how could a workplace deal with that?
That's a really good question, and it's not one that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I think it certainly fits in with a lot of the conversation going on with DEI right now, and just being accommodating and moving into use of pronouns and lifestyles and all sorts of things, and so that's a really that's a tough one. I don't think that any one person should have that level of veto power within an organization. I think all relationships, you even speak to it when you speak about being in tribes, it comes with compromise, and it comes with you giving up something for the safety of the group or the opportunity to work within a group. Maybe safety in a group, thinking about mammals in the wild versus mammals in the workplace, and the workplace is still pretty wild sometimes. But having the ability to be accommodating, to some degree. I have to tell you, on the Chinese meal, I would say I just wouldn't go again and say, hey, that sounds like a really unfun group.
That's
But
exactly what I did.
but I'm also the guy with several food allergies, and I'm probably the one that makes it hard on other people. Be like, yeah, we can only have white rice tonight because that's the only thing that I can tolerate.
But I hope you wouldn't presume to just veto for the whole
Oh,
group that nobody can have anything that you don't eat.
no way. I'd be fully aware of the impact that I'm having on other people because of something that's personal to me, and also wanting to be accommodating. I don't want to be vetoed from the group in a way. I think that by not being accommodating, that's a great way to get ostracized. So
Yeah, but the group can't veto you because then they would be accused of being anti-allergy.
uh,
They would be accused of being unfair to people with allergies, and then the leader could get fired for that.
yeah, I think that's I'm trying to come back from that comment back to your, original of what happens if you have this one outlier in a group. And I don't know, I guess every workplace makes what they would consider reasonable accommodations to people's needs. And, I think that society generally tries to put pressure on the workplace to be more accommodating to those things. And I would say that the workplace says, hey, productivity and profit is pretty important and people are important, but we have to make some balance between saying, oh, listen, I want to work full time, but I only want to work 2 hours a week. And well,
Sorry. Oh,
no,
so you said about reasonable accommodation.
no,
So, for example, when I was young, I had a lot of anxiety about bosses. I always felt like I was going to be criticized because I grew up with a lot of criticism. So, when I was in the workplace, I had anxiety about being criticized. But I did not grow up in that culture where it's if I have anxiety, it's the boss's fault. And then I could report him for giving me anxiety. So in the long run, it was good because it forced me to look at how I was creating my own anxiety and to learn to rewire myself and to be more realistic. And like you said, to compromise, but realistically, rather than saying, well, the boss has to do all the compromising because he hurt my feelings. But in today's climate, anyone who makes you uncomfortable, you can get them fired. And we all make each other uncomfortable because our brains are all different. So that's what I'm sort of questioning about how workplace trainers can deal with this.
yeah. Well, I think you have to have, I spend some time talking about trust in the workplace for sure. That's foundational to my work. And I think in a really good workplace environment, both leaders, I don't like to call people leaders that are like CEOs, because I think everybody has a responsibility to lead within an organization, even if they just lead themselves and if they lead small teams, all those things. It all plays into the dynamics of an organization and its culture. But I would say if you have an organization that has really good trust and really good leadership at the top, that they're very aware of their people, and they spend time to not just think about productivity and numbers and those sort of things, because there's a person behind those numbers. And I think what we spoke about earlier is really important, that we are all wired very different. We are so different. As much as we want to say we're the same, we all need food and water, and shelter, but we all have different needs beyond that, and you have to meet people where they are, and that takes time. And I think that we've kind of flipped the model a little bit to say that leadership is not about the person at the top knowing all the answers. I would say that for me, it's about arriving at the best answers. And I think that means showing vulnerability. And it also means allowing for vulnerability in your people, or creating space for that vulnerability. So in your scenario where you're playing that out, I would say that a good leader should be able to pick up, and they probably need to have pretty high social intelligence, right? And be able to just say, I'm spending time with Loretta to get enough of her to get behind the initial layer that we see, and to hear her story a little bit. And then and to know enough about you to say, I just saw what I said to Loretta and something happened there. And I don't know what the answer is to what just happened there, but I'm going to explore that. And I'm not going to do it in front of a group of 20 people. I'm going to have a conversation with Loretta about, you look like you were anxious when I said X. Can you tell me why? And then you have to be in a place to say, I'm going to own my own emotional baggage that came with me from my childhood. And and honor it and be okay with it and just say, and is it really serving me as an adult? And I think you do a great job of saying,
Well, I
you know,
do now, but at the time,
sure,
decades ago,
yeah,
and I think most people are not willing to own their own emotional baggage. And
yeah, sure.
it's so easy and so tempting to blame the other person
Mhm.
and just to say they made me feel this way. And so if a company has a culture that always rewards the accuser, then there's never any need for growth, because rather than learning to manage my own emotions, I could just blame you for upsetting me.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that completely, and I think that what's really challenging, and this is something that's been just said a lot in the work I'm doing, like meeting people where they are. Somebody like you and I, because of the work we do, have spent a lot of time trying to understand us and understand the complexity of us and how we got here, the things that trigger us, the things that make us happy, and they're different for everybody. And so I think you have to really give some space to the person. I would think this way in that situation. Well, that's great that you would think that way, but they're thinking about something completely different because they have a different foundation that they work from and a different life experience, accumulation of life experience that got them there. And then I think we also need to support people. Like this stuff is like, we can have all these great ideas in our head, and sometimes we need to be challenge ourselves into saying, listen, we think we're perfect and infallible, and that we don't have our own quirkiness, but we have our own quirkiness and we don't see it because we know us. And so I think we have to spend some time to try to unravel that.
But again, when you say support people, you're making the assumption that it's always the leader's fault. Um,
No, I'm not truly like, and when you say that, when you've been saying that a couple times over our time together today, and the thought that keeps bubbling up for me is I think you're painting with a pretty broad stroke about kind of cancel culture and that, that sort of thing about how we've just empowered people that are making mistakes to be able to blow the whistle and to get people fired without really exploring true culpability in that situation and being able to say, hey, listen, as a leader of the company, I shouldn't have said something to you like that, but your response was inappropriate because of this, and we both need to accept some blame in this situation. Maybe the person down low was actually the person that was fallible. And so yeah, I hear you. I think that we're quick to try to I don't know, are we attacking the people at the top out of envy and things like that?
well, I would say, yeah, yeah. And I mean, excuse me for saying, but you just repeated it again. You just said that the manager is the one who should apologize. So that's what I'm saying, is that it gives too much power to the inner mammal of every single person. Like I'll tell you, like when my daughter was 16, she went to work for Starbucks,
Yeah.
and she was immediately an expert and knew what everybody else was doing wrong.
How'd
So
that go?
so sh and then she could, maybe other other people might not have liked to have been criticized by her. She didn't like to be criticized by them, but they could all get together and blame management, and everybody always thinks they know better. But
Mm,
people who are not responsible for the outcome, like if you guys bicker over this and then the coffee gets cold,
mhm.
then doesn't cost them anything. They only gain because their inner mammal feels important. And if there's never any consequence for that kind of disruptive behavior, then I don't know. Anyway, let's get back to, we're talking about when there's a clear expectation, like you do shake hands or you don't shake hands. So that's really what a herd is like. We have clear expectations so everyone knows what what is going to be accepted, what's going to fly, and how they could stay safe.
Sure.
And as much as we don't like herds and herd behavior, but we really do like them because we like these clear expectations. And as soon as there are not clear expectations, then it's uncomfortable. On the other hand, the reality is in the modern world, we have chosen, rather than to spend your life in the group you were born into and the first company that hired you, and to spend your whole life in these rigid groups with inflexible rules. Excuse me, everybody wants to feel free to leave one group and enter another group, but then they want the other group to feel comfortable immediately, or else to blame the group for that. So I think there's a certain impossible expectations that people have because they don't understand their inner mammal.
Does that come from a desire to be accepted? Because there's not safety outside of the herd, of the new herd. So yeah, that's
So,
interesting. But no, I've moved quite a bit in my life, and I I've moved to some places where being accepted very easily wasn't the case, and it's really hard to be on the outside, and I think that it's given me, I would say the lesson I've learned is to, by being a good human, people will give you a chance. You just have to sometimes, slow the pace a little bit and earn that trust, and I don't know where you would land on this if I say the statistic of, we're really only meant to understand about 150 people, that was kind of the group size that we're used to. And so much of understanding that 150 people is building trust, and it's through behavior, repetitive behavior, I would say, that helps build trust, that we can see that, like, if that person offers me a mango and I reach out to grab it, there's a risk reward there. And if last time I reached out, they tried to bite me, I don't want to do that again. And so the trust is not there. They're going to have to rebuild that. But so I think that there's this, that has to be earned, right? And that the complexity of that is hard because we're taking in a lot of information. It's a compilation of behaviors, actions, in our case, words, nonverbal, all of those sort of things that help us get there with that group. But it's been interesting to, you tell me if I'm going off track here. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and my name is Anthony Poponi. It's a rather ethnic name from, the Italian heritage that I have. And then I moved in 1990 to Georgia. And in Georgia, I was instantly, because I was from New Jersey, called a carpetbagger and called a damn Yankee. And it was hard for me to push through that, to get accepted for being Anthony Poponi, human being, instead of this guy, Tony Poponi from Jersey, that sort of thing. And then I moved from there, I moved a few places, but I did at one point move to Hawaii for a while. And it takes a while in those places to get accepted in. The Hawaiian culture itself has been irreparably harmed by the presence of, white man coming back in and changed their culture forever, at least potentially forever. And I would say there's also that theme of a place with a lot of turnover, a lot of transient nature, is that you don't go investing time in relationships with those people if they're only going to be there for a year or two. That you start closing down your tribe a little bit to the people that aren't going to leave you, because if they're just going to leave you, then you're investing resources, time, energy, relationship building in someone that's going to leave the tribe. So I don't know, my thoughts on that. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you that people seek acceptance, but first there's a trade-off. Like, you want acceptance, that's the oxytocin, but you also want dopamine and serotonin. So you want acceptance, but then if there's an opportunity to make yourself more important than other people, or to get more resources, you'll go for that. Now, if you're going to lose acceptance by doing that, then you got to make a decision. But what if you won't? What if they can't fire you? Or, you're guaranteed, like, you have a classroom where if you have a birthday party, every single child must be invited. So
Right.
therefore, the child who steals other kids' cookies or bites other kids, you have to invite them and let them come and ruin your party. So that's what I mean about how I totally agree with you that you have to earn trust and earn acceptance.
Mhm.
But if you have a culture where everybody must be accepted no matter how they behave, then that creates a problem. But let's go back to, and also with when you're the new kid and you want acceptance. So it's always easy to take your own perspective and say, poor me, I'm left out. But what I learned is that once I get closer, like, I might see myself as left out, but then once I get closer to a group, then I think, well, I don't really have that much in common with them. So if I were accepted into that group, they would probably get on my nerves, to speak frankly. I would not accommodate. So a group has the right to want to take in people who will accommodate their shared values. And if you think you have a right to enter every group and then just tell them they're wrong and they're bad and they should be like you know, like if you talked about like Indigenous Hawaiians, are they going to let you in their group? You know, so they're making decisions, and you're thinking, well, they have a right to make decisions about who they want in their group. And in some way, you're also making decisions, and we all are, about who we want to spend our time with. And I saw a great example of that. There's a book called Playground Politics. So the skill of a child going over to other children and saying, "Can I play?" And what I learned from this is that everybody gets rejected sometimes, and even the most popular kid gets rejected sometimes. So, what is the skill that the popular kid has? So, first, they don't give up immediately and feel like they want to die when they get rejected. So, that's very valuable. And the other thing is, what do they do to get accepted? Is they watch the group and notice the game, because when kids are in the middle of a game, they don't want to let in someone who's going to break it up. They want to let in someone who's going to acknowledge and participate in the game as established. So that's what the popular kid did, is they stayed and they watched, and then they gave the signal, they gave feedback that they understood what the game was. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think that's, and you spoke to it even with your own example of when you look at a group, I think it requires some degree of malleability, unless it's like the perfectly aligned group and they're all just like you. And if that's what you want, that's great. Go seek that. I certainly don't want to be around people that are just so completely different from me that we don't have any shared values or interests. I have my own things that I find enjoyable in my life, including the interpersonal stuff that's really important. The sort of dialogues I do and do not want to have. I don't want to sit around. I'm not one to really speak much about politics. It just isn't really of interest to me. But people that are doing work in human services and human development, people that are doing the kind of work you do, that's all the stuff that lights me up. But there are larger groups, and as you start getting bigger and your pod grows to 12 people, then you're inviting in that diversity of experience, unless you're intentionally trying to be insular. So I can see both ways.
Well, I'm just thinking of an example of like when I'm in a group of people who is into athleticism, and like I ran this many miles, I ran that many miles, I climbed this peak and I climbed that peak. So I'm happy for them, but I just don't relate to it, Or I could be in another group of like, I took my money out of this fund and put it into that fund, but I just don't really. So it's just that everybody has that bond of common interest, and it's not right for me to go into a group of people who are interested in talking about how far they ran and tell them that running is stupid. Right?
But is it okay for you to go on in that group and just say, hey, I had something that I was thinking about that relates to what you're talking about, and at least transition in that conversation to not, have it being about something, and especially like, I think if there's, I think a group has the right to choose how to be as inflexible or flexible as they choose to be. I'm talking about a group of people versus a workplace that's structured or whatever that would be. But a group of people, they can just say, well, if you don't want to talk about running, don't show up to the meetup that's called the runners group, But if it's a social engagement, then if their social intelligence is turned on, or their just social awareness is turned on, then they're like, it sure looks like Loretta's tapped out over there after we've had our 25-minute conversation about our favorite running shoe. And I hear you on that.
Well, yeah. And even if I'm tapped out, it's still my responsibility to manage my feelings. But I agree with, when you said social awareness, but what I'm saying is, if I listen to their conversation about running, and then I think, well, now I'm going to give them a long speech about dopamine, but they're not interested in dopamine. And then I'm going to be angry at them for not being interested in dopamine. That's just sort of what I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah, that's a false expectation about what would be appropriate there. So take that scenario, and they've talked about running for a while, and you're like, oh, I wanted to talk about some dopamine and how it relates to running. Fine, that's there's a segue there,
Exactly.
right? But then you're not finding that enjoyable, and you say, hey, listen, it seems like you all love running. I'm not really interested in what you're talking about, and I'm going to excuse myself from this conversation. You can be ostracized for that, and so there's that risk for reward again of being like, I'm going to compromise and listen to the group, because even if I'm not entirely interested, I can be interested in the human condition and a human experience. I may never come back to this group again because I don't want to have this conversation. But there's that, and that's dynamic, like if that's a clique, you can be ostracized, right? If it's an inclusive group that didn't realize they were turning it into the runners group unofficial meeting that Loretta unfortunately got invited to and is now victim to, how
say I'm a victim.
I knew you were going to react to that word. I knew you were going to react to that word.
Okay, you used it.
I know, it's fine. And I'll take that word and just say that we have subjected her to conversations she is not interested in. I know that you don't believe in so.
Thank you, subjected me. If I chose. So anyway, we're running out of time. So do you want to tell people, and thank you, it's a great conversation.
Thanks.
Would you like to tell people how they could find out more about Focus on the 40?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So Focus on the 40 is the name of the programs and all the resources and things that I do. And you can find that at either my name, anthonypoponi.com, Poponi, or you can find it at Focus on the 40. That's 40 not spelled out as a word, but the numbers. So Focus on the 40.
Great. Good. Well, it was such a pleasure catching up with you, Anthony.
Yeah, you as well. It's always nice to converse with you.
We'll bump elbows.
I'll be doing this, not sure what to do.
Great.
Don't be far away. All right, bye for now.
It was great to have you with us today. We hope you'll keep learning about your inner mammal and keep checking out the resources of innermammalinstitute.org. We have books, videos, blogs, and graphics that will help you build power over your mammal brain. Help us spread the word by reviewing and subscribing to our podcast and checking out our books and videos. And do join us live on Sundays so you can ask your questions about rewiring your happy brain chemicals. Details at innermammalinstitute.org/podcast.